And there was actually a study that showed those among non-diabetics, so everybody in the study did not have diabetes. Among these people, those with higher average glucose levels were actually perceived to be older than those who were able to keep their glucose levels in a more steady range. So all of that is so fascinating to me. Hello, and welcome to another solo episode of #Skinenthusiast, the podcast. On today's episode, I'm going to walk you through a little bit about how I eat and also how I move my body for optimal skin health. So there's been a lot of emerging data in the last 5 to 10 years about just how our diet affects our skin. And one of the most exciting areas for me is glucose. And there has been a few studies that have shown the way that glucose can affect our skin. Obviously, we know that higher glycemic index foods, persistently high glucose levels can affect acne, and it can aggravate acne in those who are acne prone. But now we're also seeing that glucose levels also can affect the age that we're perceived, or the way our skin ages, through a cascade of basically problems that happen within our skin. High glucose levels can actually eat up our collagen. And there was actually a study that showed those among non-diabetics, so everybody in the study did not have diabetes. Among these people, those with higher average glucose levels were actually perceived to be older than those who were able to keep their glucose levels in a more steady range. So all of that is so fascinating to me. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my own experiment with using a CGM in this episode. But first, I want to get to kind of how I eat for my skin and what we know about our diet and our skin. So I already mentioned high glycemic index foods, but there's also other foods that we know can be problematic. Actually, a lot of supplements can be problematic too. So we know like B6, B12, whey protein can be problematic for those who are acne prone. High glycemic index foods, like I mentioned, which is of course sugar and desserts and things like that, but also starchy foods. So people often don't understand that starchy foods can also raise the blood sugar. So these can be things like pasta, like bread, like potatoes. Not just sugary foods raise our blood sugar. And as I mentioned, unbalanced blood sugar levels can worsen a variety of skin concerns and can also make our skin appear older. The good for our skin when it comes to our diet are things like antioxidants. So lots of fruits and vegetables, healthy fats, so nuts, seeds, olive oil when eaten, consumed internally, not applied topically. These are all really good for our skin health, for our skin barrier health. So just keeping an open mind when it comes to trying new healthful foods. Keeping a whole foods diet is really important. Also, some surprising things like dairy. So we often associate dairy with acne, but what the data actually shows is that it's low-fat dairy that can often be problematic, not high-fat dairy. And I say that because a lot of the skin-friendly recipes I share include like full-fat Greek yogurt, full-fat milk, things like that don't aggravate my very acne-prone skin, again, because it's that whole-fat dairy. And not only do we know, of course, that diet can affect our skin, but so can other lifestyle choices like our exercise. So we've always known that exercise was important for skin health and anti-aging and longevity, but we actually know more recently that specifically resistance training is really helpful for anti-aging purposes. In fact, there's a variety of studies on this, and one that I love is resistance training rejuvenates aging skin by reducing circulating inflammatory factors and enhancing dermal extracellular matrices. So we know through these various studies that actually increasing resistance training, increasing weight training can help our skin to appear not as aged as our counterparts who aren't participating in these activities. And I know when I mentioned I was doing an episode on this, I had a lot of questions about the data. So I'm going to link all of these studies below for anybody who wants to really dig into it, who's really interested into the science of how our diet and our exercise affects our skin health, and especially for anti-aging purposes. So that brings me to a little bit of a trial, a little test experiment that I've been doing in my own diet and exercise. And that is that I've been wearing a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor. So a little background about me personally. I am on all accounts considered quote unquote healthy. I eat pretty well. I exercise. All of my labs are within normal limits, considered metabolically healthy for the most part. However, when I was pregnant with my daughter Josie 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with gestational diabetes, which means I have diabetes when I was pregnant, but I don't have it when I'm not pregnant. So when I'm not pregnant, my body metabolizes glucose pretty well. I don't seem to have any insulin sensitivity. But what we know about gestational diabetes and if you've ever been diagnosed with this, you've probably heard the statistic, but it's something around 70 or 75% of women who are diagnosed with gestational diabetes during pregnancy will go on to develop diabetes type 2 in their lifetime, which is a really scary figure. That's a very high number. And especially when you have women like myself and like many of my friends who have been diagnosed who don't seem to have any other risk factors, it can be a little bit hard to grapple with. I know I had a hard time grappling with a diagnosis, not because I was worried about controlling my blood sugars while I was pregnant. I actually was very easily able to do that with the right diet, but because I worried about the implications for my long-term health. So that brings me to my current experiment. I wanted to wear a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor, to see just how I was metabolizing that glucose, because while numbers the doctor can be normal, there can be issues underlying that don't present themselves for decades. And if there was an issue, I wanted to make sure to nip it in the bud now, change my diet and lifestyle however I needed to make sure that I wasn't going to develop prediabetes or diabetes in the future. And then, of course, for those of us who aren't at risk, I can say even if I wasn't at risk for developing diabetes in the future, it's still something I would want to know, again, for all of those skin health benefits that I mentioned earlier. Of course, I'm a skin enthusiast. I want to make sure I'm doing everything on every level to keep my skin looking as healthy as possible for as long as possible. And if that means keeping my glucose levels in check, that is what I'm going to do. So let's get to my experiment. I kind of want to talk about the shocking truth that I came to terms with once starting the CGM, and that was that a lot of foods that I thought would not spike me did spike me, and some things that I thought might spike me didn't spike my blood sugar. So let's first talk about the not so surprising spikers. So things like eating a starchy meal before sitting down or winding down for the evening. So if I eat a meal that's a lot of pasta and then I hit the couch for the rest of the evening, my blood sugar spikes, which isn't that surprising. These are things kind of we know intuitively, right? Of course, heavy desserts seem to spike my blood sugar. But I want to talk about some surprising things that were maybe a good surprise. One of them being I had a really starchy meal. It had lots of rice pilaf. It was delicious. Lots of bread. It was so good. So I was really expecting to see a blood sugar spike after this meal just because of the sheer amount of carbs. But I did have my Greek salad first, which was really rich in like a lot of hearty fibrous vegetables. And I went on a little walk around the block to my car from the restaurant after. And those things combined, I'm going to talk a little bit about that later, but those little quote unquote hacks really made a difference. I didn't see a blood sugar spike more than I would with a normal low carb meal. So that was like really exciting to me. It was kind of confirmation of these little hacks that I have been incorporating the last few years. And some sneaky spikers. So these are things that spiked me that I didn't necessarily think would. One of them being Go macro bars. I'm so sad to say it because I love Go macro bars. They're like what I reach for when I'm on the go. I'm always trying to increase protein because I want to increase muscle mass because of its ability to help us with glucose metabolism. And we know that the more muscle mass you have, the better able you are to metabolize glucose. It's better for your glucose and your blood sugar health, which of course comes back. It all comes full circle, right? We know that resistance training helps with anti-aging. We know that taking care of your glucose levels also helps with anti-aging. So it all makes sense when you think about it. However, this particular way that I was trying to get protein was not serving me because I had just half of a Go macro bar after a meal, mind you. It was like kind of like a sweet snack at the end because they do have like this like chocolate peanut butter flavor. It spiked me more than when I had ice cream a couple of nights prior. So very interesting, even after a high protein meal. Another interesting spike after a high protein meal, I had a bowl of my favorite beanless chili, which I'm going to talk about. It's like one of my favorite go-to recipes that I know doesn't spike blood sugar. It's really high in protein. And I also had an egg bite. So both very healthful foods, high in protein. My daughter was eating a banana. She didn't finish it. I ate the other half after that meal and I spiked so high. In fact, I had a meeting immediately after, a Zoom meeting, and I was sitting on my desk taking the meeting and all of a sudden I got this alert on my phone, like your blood sugar spiking, try to move to help blunt it. And I was like, wow, even though my stomach was full, I had a really high protein meal, I still was spiking after just half of a banana. So that was interesting to me. One thing that was a pleasant surprise was just how much walking can make a huge difference. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about these hacks later, but walking after a meal was a hack that I learned from the glucose goddess who I started following years ago. She basically talks a lot about glucose metabolism and how we can increase our overall health by being mindful of our glucose levels. And one of her hacks is to take a walk after a meal. So it's something I've incorporated, especially after I have a really starchy meal or after I have dessert. I try to just take a little walk around the block, but I didn't notice until those levels were like right in front of me, literally. Like on my phone, I'm seeing the glucose levels in real time, how much walking made a difference. So I could, for instance, eat dessert and then go for a walk for 30 minutes, and it blunts me to almost like a normal level after a meal. So that's really exciting. And I think it's a really good tool to have in your tool belt, because what's important for me is while I want to make mindful, healthful changes, I don't want to be restrictive. I want to enjoy my life. I want to eat the things that make me happy, especially like I want to be with my daughter. I want to be with my family. And like a lot of that is centered around food in our society. So it was important to me to be able to do some of these things so that I can still enjoy my life while keeping my glucose levels a little bit healthier. Another surprising not spike for me was stress and caffeine. I have heard from a lot of people who have done similar experiments that stress seemed to spike their blood sugar, and also caffeine. I haven't really experienced that, and the way I feel after caffeine, I kind of expected that I might. So it's been a pleasant surprise. I will say I do a half cap in the morning. I make it myself. I use Four Sigmatic coffee. I mix it myself. I do 2 scoops of their decaf and 2 scoops of their regular like gut health blend, make my own and put a little full fat dairy in there. And I haven't noticed a spike with caffeine with that. So that's been a really pleasant surprise. And I mentioned a little bit about the glucose goddess. So she's someone I would love to have on the show. She has a book that I highly recommend. I'll link it below. It has given me a lot of these hacks that I incorporate now, and that I can see now that I'm tracking my glucose levels are actually working. One of them being, of course, walks after meals. And as I mentioned, I'm so pleasantly surprised with how helpful this is. I'm definitely going to be continue to incorporate that into my routine. Anytime I have dessert, anytime I have a really heavy meal or lots of carbs, I will be walking after. One thing that I found kind of funny was that if I go for a walk after like a particularly sugary dessert, I'll think I'm in the clear, and then I'll go sit down, and like 30 minutes, let's say I walk for 30 minutes. I'm like, oh, I'm not spiking, which I normally would have by now. And I sit down, then I'll start to spike, which is funny. So definitely it is commensurate with the amount of glucose that you're ingesting. So if I'm having if I'm having a really sugary dessert, I know that I need to walk for a little bit longer than if I just have, like last night, I had just one little teacup that was calling my name. It was the Justin's, like they have the peanut butter and chocolate cups. Oh my God, they're so good. And I walked after and just on my little walking pad and watched my show on Bravo and didn't have any spike. That walking pad, by the way, has been the best investment that I've made, because if it's late, if it's really hot, which it still is in Miami, it's still 90 degrees every day, even though we're in October, I can walk on my walking pad and still get my steps in, which is really helpful for my overall health and like my glucose levels. Another little hack that she shares, which I've incorporated for the past few years, is fiber before a meal. So I mentioned that I had gone out to a restaurant, had a delicious, really carby meal, but I find that whenever I have my salad first, or even before I have dessert, if I chomp on some carrots and celery, it seems to blunt that blood sugar spike. So when you're eating that fibrous food, it kind of creates a mesh in your belly so that when you're then eating the glucose after, it's not as readily absorbed and doesn't spike your blood sugar as much. That's a tip, the very, very tangible tip that I got from the Glucose Goddess, that doesn't make me have to deprive myself of the things I love. Every once in a while, I can still have them, but still blunt that blood sugar spike. And what I will say too is, even if you're someone not interested in checking your levels, which I wasn't for a very long time, I was kind of against it. The CGM, we're going to talk about the controversy about CGMs a little bit later in this episode. But even if you're not someone who's interested in tracking the numbers, I was very in tune with the way food made me feel. And I could tell that if I had ice cream after dinner, for instance, I would feel fine for the remainder of the night, but I'd be waking up, I didn't good sleep, I wouldn't feel well the next day. And I know that that's the result of the blood sugar roller coaster that would come after. So my blood sugar would spike, I'd dump a bunch of insulin to try to correct, then I would overcorrect to become hypoglycemic, and then blood sugar would go up again. It's this really delicate balance, and I was very aware of how things were making me feel. For instance, if I went and got pancakes for breakfast, my friends know I don't. Like, I would never do that. I would never go out to eat and just get pancakes on an empty stomach, because I would feel like absolute crap the remainder of the day. If I wanted to do something like that, I'll do my eggs, I'll do my avocado, and then I'll have like a little bit of someone else's pancakes or pancakes for the table. But I'm not going to have like sugary, starchy foods on an empty stomach because I will feel terrible. If we go out for donuts, as much as I would love a donut first thing in the morning, I'm not going to do it because it's going to set me up for a day that feels absolutely terrible. And it's a roller coaster that I can't get off of for the rest of the day. So sometimes even multiple days. So even if you're someone who's not interested in tracking the numbers, I think if you just pay attention, you'll start to notice how these things are making you feel. And then you can understand what's happening internally with your glucose levels after that. So that's why I've been incorporating these tips for so long, because I found that it helps me feel a lot better, help me sleep better after a carby meal, things like that. This episode is brought to you by, well, me. Skinthusiast.com is your one-stop shop for all things skin, hair, and beauty. I have countless blog posts to educate you on all the skin concerns and most common skin questions I receive. We also have a complete skincare basics guide on our shop page, as well as the cutest In My Skin era crew necks. If you want to support the show, please head over to skinthusiast.com/shop, and don't forget to rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, something that has helped with glucose levels is increasing muscle mass. So we know that the more muscle mass we have on our body, the better we metabolize glucose. So again, this should be like light bulbs going off in your head. Well, increased muscle mass helps us look younger, and so does keeping our blood sugar in check. So it makes sense that these things kind of go hand in hand. But just increasing my muscle mass, doing more weightlifting, doing more resistance training in the past few years has been really helpful for the way I feel overall, for my glucose levels. And the way I do that is with actual like programmed training. So I feel like what was missing before was that I was the type of person that just kind of like chased the sweat. I chased the workout. If I was, sweating really hard and out of breath, I felt like, yes, I crushed it. I got a great workout. And that's what I chased a few times a week without any real rhyme or reason. So I'd like wake up, open my ClassPass, be like, what am I in the mood for today? And click that and go, rather than actually following specific programming for different muscle groups and understanding how there's this delicate balance of training versus resting muscle groups and how that's really the most efficient way to build muscle. So I do some different online training apps. One that I really like is EvFlow, I think it's called. I'll link it below. I think it's EvFlow, but it's Dr. Shannon. She's a doctor of physical therapy. So I love that it's a PT actually teaching the classes. Like someone like me who's always like chasing the expert. I love that like the person teaching me the workout is the doctor of physical therapy. I think that's really cool. And she just has the training to back it up. And there's so many little things that she teaches in her app that like I've never been taught. And when she explains why, I'm like, oh, like this is why it's helpful to understand body mechanics from like a PhD level. So she's really helpful. I love that app. I also really love Madeline Moves for working out at home. Both of these are at home. Madeline Moves does, I think, have more options if you're someone who likes to work out in a gym and you have access to more equipment and machines and stuff like that. She has options like that. But I really like either one of those. But I try to follow the programming like for an extended period of time because it is very thought out. Like it's not something I would recommend like, oh, let me just do one of these this week along with the other classes I'm doing. And I'm going to have Dr. Shannon on the show actually to talk about just this because I think it's just so fascinating to understand just how much programming can help you build muscle. So this is something that's been helpful for me when it comes to my glucose levels. Again, picked it up because not only do I want my body to look better, but I want my skin to look better for longer. So what is my plan moving forward? So I've been doing the CGM for about 2 weeks now, and you'll hear from most experts that a lot of them recommend just doing it for about a month at a time, maybe doing that once a year to collect your data and move on. And the reason is because it can be very addicting to see these numbers. Like you're checking your score every day, you're checking what happens after every single morsel of food that you put in your mouth, and that's not healthy, right? What is healthy is to understand how your body metabolizes some of these foods, what is spiking your blood sugar to an unhealthy level, right? Because a quote unquote spike in blood sugar after you eat, a rise in your blood sugar is normal. That's like physiologically how our body works. What's not normal if it's persistently too high or you're too high for too long and your average glucose are too high for too long. So just understanding how this food is affecting your body, how your movement is affecting your body, how caffeine or stress is affecting your body, and then taking that information and making changes to your lifestyle based on it. So that's kind of my plan. I'm going to do this for 2 more weeks, keep collecting this data, make any changes to my diet, to my lifestyle to help keep my glucose in a more even level more throughout the day, and keep my strength focused workouts. I want to keep building muscle, not only because I love the way it makes my body look and feel. I feel like building muscle is such a great way to like increase your overall fitness from a kind of external perspective, because when you have more muscle mass, you're burning more fat. You're not chasing cardio. Like everything just works more efficiently when you have a little bit more muscle mass on your body. And when I say more muscle mass, you guys, I don't think someone walking down the street would be like, oh, she lifts weights. Like I would love to look like that. Like I would love to build more muscle, but I think that people get this kind of idea in their head of like a meathead, which is great too, but like that's so not me. I don't need enough protein for that to ever happen. But what I mean is just like healthfully increasing the amount of muscle mass on your body compared to the amount of fat on your body, which is good for our longevity. It's good for our brain health. It's good for our skin health. It's good for so many things. Really, the skin is just the icing on the cake. So I'm going to continue those workouts. I'm going to continue to incorporate these hacks that I learned from the Glucose Goddess. Also, Lily Nichols has some really, really good information. If I could recommend 2 books to women of childbearing age, whether or not you ever plan to have children, it would be those. It would be the Glucose Goddess book and Lily Nichols. I love all her books. She has one now for fertility, which really, I think fertility, like when you see real food for fertility, yes, there's going to be some tips and tricks on how to maintain the most healthful diet for people who are actively trying to conceive. But fertility is a vital sign, right? It's a biomarker. Like if we are, I want to say this sensitively because there's a lot of issues around this topic, but what I mean to say is that that book is structured in a way to give you tips to live the most healthfully you can as a woman, whether or not you ever plan to have children. So both of those books are like invaluable, life-changing, truly life-changing, changed my life, changed the trajectory of my life clearly, because I am now at risk for developing diabetes in the future. But with those tips, I will most likely be successful at not becoming diabetic because I have all this information at my fingertips. So I'm going to continue to incorporate all those little hacks that I learned, like fiber before my meals, post-family walks, all of it. There's a lot of other great ones in those books. And I'm not going to deprive myself. I'm going to continue to live my life in a way that I want to. I'm going to continue to indulge every now and again. Again, these hacks are going to be a way to help me do that. And also just understanding that keeping myself in a good space, keeping my glucose levels on average in a healthy place makes you feel a little bit better about the times that you do indulge. So I want to get to some audience questions. One of them being, which CGM am I using? So the glucose monitor that I'm using is the Dexcom 7. And in this country, you can't get the Dexcom 7 or similar ones without a prescription unless you go through something like Levels. So Levels basically has a study and Dexcom is part of it. So that's what I did. If you have a diagnosis of diabetes, you can get these, through your insurance. I don't believe that it's easy to get if you have gestational diabetes. I personally haven't tried to ask my doctor to see if I could get a prescription. I think it would probably be pretty difficult, but it's always worth a shot having the conversation with your doctor. So the Dexcom 7 is the actual monitor that hooks up to my arm, the back of my arm. It's not painful at all. I actually filmed myself applying it. I was nervous the first time, but you really don't feel it. It's just a little thread that goes into your skin and it measures the glucose in the interstitial fluid. So it's not painful. It doesn't bother me. I don't know what's there most of the time. And it stays on, I think the Dexcom 7 are for 10 days. They stay on for 10 days at a time. And then Levels is the membership I have. That's the app on my phone that actually shows me all the different glucose levels in real time. It gives you kind of a score, helps you understand what your average glucose levels are for the day, for the week, for the month, etc. Kind of packages everything into a really pretty picture. Any affordable ones, yes, if you have a prescription, they're affordable. No, if not. Unfortunately, this isn't really an affordable experiment. Hopefully one day it will be as it becomes more and more available. For me, I'm at a place in my life where the investment is worth it for me. Again, it's not something I would do continuously. It's something I'm just going to do for a short period of time, collect the data, maybe do this once a year just as like a check-in along with my regular labs, along with seeing my doctor for all the other things, just to make sure that metabolically I'm staying as healthy as possible. What foods do I avoid? If I want to keep my glucose levels in check, I avoid really starchy meals. So lots of pasta. I avoid these things on an empty stomach, most importantly. So like I never will eat bread first. Like when it comes at dinner. I'm not saying I will skip the bread completely, but I won't eat it when it first comes. I'll eat my salad first. I'll always order some sort of a fibrous food to eat before I go on with the rest of my meal. And then if I still want the bread and butter, I'll have that after. That, again, is something I incorporated before I ever put on a CGM, and I noticed a huge difference in the way it made me feel, which is why I kept doing it. Other foods I avoid, obviously now I'm stopping the Go Macro bars after seeing that. Also, something I was noticing is when I was out and about getting my smoothies, like there's a few restaurants here in Miami that I get smoothies from, just a little bit of banana or just a little bit of mango really does make a difference. Like, it does increase my glucose levels. When I make my skin-friendly smoothie at home, I see no spike in blood sugar levels, and that's because I use low glycemic index fruits like berries. That's the only sweetness to it at all, except my protein powder has a little bit of like a non-sugar sweetness to it. And then, but when I was out and about, I would order essentially the same thing, but I'd be like, oh, like I'll instead of one banana, I'll reduce it in the notes to half. And even then, or just a little bit of mango, even then I was still seeing the blood sugar spike, even when it was combined with the avocado and the spinach and the protein powder and all of that. So that's something I've been avoiding and just trying to make more of my smoothies at home. One, not question, but comment that came through the question box was, but I don't want to be encouraging patients who don't need it. So I want to get into this controversy around CGMs in the medical field. And first, I want to say that I just don't subscribe to this type of thinking. I think that if you're interested in understanding these levels, you should absolutely have the ability to see them. Like, it's your body, it's your health. You should have 100% access to that information. Now, with this information comes responsibility, right? Because you're going to be seeing a lot of numbers, you're going to be seeing a lot of charts, a lot of graphs that might feel overwhelming and even scary at times, and you have to understand what to do with that information. What we don't want to do with that information is get obsessive and try to flatten the curve completely. We don't want to be monitoring every single piece of food that goes into our mouth and what it does to our bodies, which again is easy to do with these apps, which is why it often is recommended to do just for a short period of time. What you do want to do is collect the data and then, find your expert that you trust and have a conversation with them and say, this is what's happening. Is this normal for me? Is there any red flags I need to look out for? At the end of the day, if this entire program saves one person from developing diabetes in the next 15 to 20 years, it's a win, right? Like these diseases, anyone who's had a family member who has had diabetes knows how destructive it can be. And this isn't, high glucose levels don't just lead to diabetes. There's a lot of other health conditions that are linked to persistently high glucose levels and insulin resistance. So if we have the option to understand this about our body, then I think 100% we should. Again, it's not the most affordable. I wish it was more affordable. Hopefully one day it will be. But to just not encourage people to know, I think is irresponsible. Okay, recipes that have been working for me. I mentioned the beanless chili by Lily Nichols. That is one of the recipes that I love from her gestational diabetes book. I still make that. My skin-friendly smoothie and also my skin-friendly dessert, which is whole fat Greek yogurt. It is berries. I put flaxseed. I put pumpkin seeds. I put some low or no sugar, actually, chocolate chips from a brand called the Canto. If you follow me on Instagram, you've seen me post about it. I have it every single night. So I'll leave some of those recipes below. Those are some of my favorites. I'll also leave a link to Lily Nichols' book because she has not only all the information you could ever want to understand about glucose and just eating in general for a healthy body, but also lots of recipes too. I think what makes this really exciting is that different things are going to affect different people differently. So there is variability when it comes to how your body metabolizes these foods. So I think that's the most exciting thing about having access to this like very personal health information. So while the recipes that I just shared are low glycemic index, they shouldn't raise your blood sugar, it's always good to just understand how something affects you. So that's kind of a very high level understanding of how I eat for my skin and body health, how I move my body for my skin and body health, how I incorporate weight training and walks, and now how I incorporate monitoring my glucose levels with my CGM. If you have any questions, please let me know in the DMs. Again, this is not medical advice. This is just my personal experience. And again, with there being some controversy in the CGM space, I think it's always best to just talk with your expert that you trust, your provider that you trust, understand your options before you jump into something like this. I just wanted to kind of explain mainly how changing our diet just a little bit can lead to better health outcomes and better skin outcomes in the future, which is just the icing on the cake. Maybe not the icing on the cake, but you get what I mean. So feel free to head over to my Instagram and let me know any questions you want me to cover in this podcast. Thank you for following along. If you haven't yet rated and reviewed the show, it means so much to me. I try to pick a few reviews every week to send a little goodie box to, and anybody who shares the episode to their stories, tags me, lets me know what was their favorite part of the episode, what they gained from it, what they might change. I like to send some boxes to those people too. So thank you for your support. Thank you for following along. I hope you found this episode valuable, and I'll speak to you next week, skin enthusiasts.